she just remained silent for a long time until I found out about her work. And it's one of the cases I wrote about in Forbidden Archaeology. And because of that publicity, there was a wealthy man in the United States who was interested in archaeology. He heard about, he'd read my book, he'd seen a television show based on it, and he decided he was going to fund some new research down there that I think is eventually going to prove Virginia Steen McIntyre was right. Now, I could go on and on and on and on, going through hundreds of cases like this knowledge filtering that goes on. And we get asked, well, I mean, what difference does it really make whether, human beings have been around, for a few thousand years or a few million years? Does it really make any difference? And it really does make a difference in this sense that if human beings really have been around for millions and millions and millions of years, going all the way back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth, that means we need new theories of human origins, because the current theories are very materialistic, and the alternatives are very, very spiritual. They involve a spiritual element that's not present in the current theories. And one reason I think this knowledge filtering goes on is to keep people focused on the production and consumption of more and more material things, and keeping certain political and economic, cultural systems intact. The goals that we set for ourselves individually and collectively are determined by our sense of identity. Say if I think I'm an American man, then I behave like that. Our sense of identity determines the goals that we set for ourselves individually and collectively. So through the monopoly they have in the education system, the supporters of the current theories of human origins are able to dictate to everyone their sense of identity. Yes, you're just another evolved ape. You're just a combination of chemicals. As the English scientist and supporter of Darwin, Richard Dawkins, says, you are robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. In other words, you're just a robot machine made of chemicals. This is what you are, really. And not only that, you're not just a robot machine made of chemicals, you're a robot machine made of chemicals in competition with other robot machines made of chemicals for survival. So because this sense of identity is being propagated through all the education systems all around the world, it's not surprising that our whole worldwide human civilization has become very materialistic. And we think that to produce and consume more and more material things is the main purpose of human life. Maybe not you, you're a special group of people, you're attracted to the spiritual element, but I'm talking about society in general. And I think this is the root cause of the environmental crisis that the world is now facing. Because we're overproducing and overconsuming material things, we're poisoning the air, poisoning the land, poisoning the water. And not only that, because of this material concept of the self that we have, we see ourselves in competition with others, in competition with other individuals, with other classes, with other races, with other nations, with other religions. So it's a mentality that breeds conflict on a lot of different levels. It also breeds selfishness and greed. Because if you're going to survive in the great struggle for existence, you've got to be number one somehow or other in competition with everybody else. You've got to be a few steps ahead of the other people. So in terms of I believe that's the root of the financial crisis that the world's now facing. There are people in the system who take unfair advantage of it to exploit others, and they prosper while others suffer. because of this mentality. And I think this mentality is also the source of a lot of the conflict, that we see in the world today. So if we want to change all of this, it's necessary to have our education systems presenting a different concept of the self. Not the concept that we are robot chemical machines in competition with other robot chemical machines. We're evolved apes. We're simply, we're beings of pure consciousness. We're all related to each other. We're all meant to live in harmony with each other, in harmony with the source of all conscious beings. We're not meant to overexploit the Earth's resources. We're meant to satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible, while putting most of our human energy into developing the resource of consciousness, to elevate consciousness back to its original pure state. And that's the purpose of the different systems of yoga and meditation and contemplation that are there in the Vedic culture and many of the world's great spiritual traditions. They all tend to have this aspect, but it's been overwhelmed by the materialistic concept of the self that's being propagated through most of the education systems in the world today. And one thing that helps maintain it is this knowledge filtering process. And because people, they look towards science for guidance these days. And, the scientists have filtered the evidence so it looks like everything's very materialistic. There's actually a lot of evidence for the soul, for the subtle mind element. There's evidence.
That's written in your book, Human Devolution?
Yes. He's plugging my book for me, so usually they tell you don't plug your book. I did write a book about human devolution where I go into other aspects of the knowledge filtering process that have to do with the scientific evidence for the existence of the soul, for the subtle mind element with its very unusual powers, evidence that we aren't just chemical machines that have arisen by chance interactions of molecules and natural selection, all that there's some design and purpose. We've been placed here for a purpose as conscious beings. And we find there are two types of people in the world. Because originally we all belonged together on that level of pure consciousness, which we call Krishna consciousness. Others may have other names for it. But we're all meant to be on that level. We're not meant to be competing with each other for scarce material resources. We're meant to be cooperating with each other, living in peace and harmony together, understanding we're all beings of pure consciousness. We're all coming from the same source. We're all related to each other. There's no need to be fighting for scarce material resources. And we should be figuring out how we can live on this planet in the most simple, natural way possible. We have to satisfy our material needs, yes, but as Gandhi once said, on Earth there's enough for everybody's needs, actual needs, but there's not enough for everyone's greed. And the way to change these things, the only way to change them, is to go right to the root, and that is the concept of the self. So I'm doing my little bit to try to change these things in society at large, because there are all kinds of groups of individuals all over the world who understand these things, but they're in the minority these days. If you look at the main power centers of modern civilization, they're very much opposed to these ideas, and to keep them intact, they utilize the education systems. They give a monopoly to the materialistic scientists in the education system so that only their ideas are taught. And they make use of this knowledge filtering to give people the impression that science means materialism. It's basically what it's all about. Chemicals, chemical laws, evolution. If things are going to change on a wide scale, I think this knowledge filtering process has to be broken down, and it's something that I'm trying to do. So,
can I ask you a question? First, I'd like to read a quote that I just ran into just hours ago.
okay.
By Sinclair, who's an American writer, lived in early 1900s, says, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." In regards to filtration, knowledge. But I wanted to ask, like the woman scientist that you mentioned, McIntyre?
Virginia Steen McIntyre.
Virginia.
Yes.
She experienced such a fierce opposition, and you said that her career pretty much ended there. What about you? Do you experience any opposition, and in what forms?
Well, well, let me say this. The scientific world is not monolithic. There is an element there that I call the fundamentalist materialists, who are very influential in the world of science and in the universities and in the education systems. And they're very much opposed to the kinds of things that I'm saying. They don't want to hear them. They don't want anybody else to hear them. But there's other scientists who are a little more open-minded. They may be, at the present moment, supporters of all the current theories, but they're open-minded enough that they're willing to listen to alternative ideas and even modify some of their ideas. And scientists like that who've invited me to speak at hundreds of universities and all around the world, who have invited me to speak at major international scientific conferences all over the world, at scientific institutions all over the world, like the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Royal Institution in London, meetings of the World Archaeological Congress, meetings of the European Association of Archaeologists. And my books are now in about 20 different languages, so I'm invited to speak at universities all over the world. So there are some open-minded educators and scientists who are willing to listen to new ideas and things like that. But there's this other element that really doesn't like that, and they sometimes try to interfere. For example, my books are published in Russian language. So I went to Russia, and I was lecturing at universities there. And in one city, one big city, and one big university, some professors of history had invited me to speak at a university. And so I arrived in the city, and then the day before the lecture, the president of the university canceled the lecture. And the professors tried to get him to change his mind. He said, no, he's not going to speak here. I can't allow it. So what had happened is that pressure groups, who were aware of my lecture tour, they'd gotten to him, and they had objected to my lecturing for two reasons. Number one, I was opposing the Darwinian theory of human evolution, and two, I'm connected with the Krishna consciousness movement. So these were two deadly sins for these people. So then these professors, they couldn't convince the president of the university